You never held my rank against me until you needed my paycheck. Those were the words I said to my mother, standing in my dress blues, 30 minutes before I was supposed to walk across a stage and receive the Bronze Star with Valor. She didn't answer. She just looked at the empty seats beside her seats I'd reserved for her and my stepfather, Gary, and told me she had somewhere better to be. I stood at attention in the wings of that auditorium, staring out at the one empty row reserved for family, and I felt something in my chest go quiet and cold. Because I already knew who was about to sit in those seats instead. And in 40 minutes, on a live stream watched by 12,000 people, the woman who actually raised me was about to receive something my mother could never have imagined. Exactly 90 minutes later, my phone lit up the dark interior of my car with 31 missed calls. Before I tell you what happened in that hallway, hit like and subscribe if this story feels close to home, and tell me in the comments what state you're watching from and what time it is right now for you. My name is Sergeant Renee Castille. I'm 28 years old, and for 6 years I served as a combat medic attached to a forward surgical team, first in Kandahar province, and then in a series of places I'm still not allowed to name in detail. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in a house where love came with a price tag attached, and I didn't understand that until I was old enough to be sending most of my paycheck home every single month. My mother, Denise, remarried when I was 14. Gary came with a teenage daughter of his own, Brittany, who was 2 years younger than me and treated like glass from day one. I was treated like a resource. That's the only honest word for it. When I turned 18 and enlisted, my mother cried on camera for a local news segment about military moms, and then, 3 weeks after my first paycheck hit my account, she called asking for help with the mortgage. I sent it. I didn't think twice. That's the thing nobody tells you about growing up starved for approval. You'll pay almost anything for a taste of it, even if the person selling it to you never actually delivers. For 6 years, I sent home a portion of every paycheck, not because they asked nicely, because they asked constantly, and because saying no came with consequences. I wasn't ready to face long silences, guilt trips about how ungrateful I was, reminders that Denise had sacrificed everything, raising me alone before Gary came along. I know how that sounds now. I know what some of you are already thinking, reading this. Why would a grown woman hand over her own combat, pay to people who treated her like an ATM? I used to ask myself the same thing, in the dark, in a cot, 3,000 miles from home. The answer is that nobody sends money to strangers. You send it to the story you're still hoping is true, the story where your mother loves you the way mothers are supposed to. The turn happened 8 months ago, on a night I was pulling security watch outside a forward operating base in a place I still dream about. I was scrolling through Instagram to stay awake, the way you do when the silence outside gets too loud and you need noise in your head instead. And there was Brittany, standing in front of a brand new charter school building, with a giant ribbon-cutting scissors in her hand, wearing a blazer that cost more than my monthly allotment. The caption said she'd just opened her own private tutoring academy. 2 locations. My mother and Gary stood on either side of her, beaming, tagging themselves in every photo. "So proud of our girl for building something real," my mother had written. I sat there in the dark with my rifle across my knees and did the math I'd been avoiding for years. Brittany didn't have a business degree. She didn't have investors. What she had was a mother who'd been quietly forwarding my combat pay into a joint account for over a year, money I'd been told was going toward family expenses and helping Gary with his knee surgery. I found out that night, using channels I'm not going to describe in detail, that there had been no knee surgery. There was a business loan, co-signed using documentation from an account I didn't know existed, built on the back of allotments I'd set up in good faith when I was 22 years old and desperate to matter to somebody. I didn't cry. I didn't call and scream. I did what I was trained to do under fire, which is nothing sudden, nothing emotional, just precise, controlled movement. I opened my finance portal on my phone. I found every single automatic transfer tied to my mother's name and Brittany's name. I canceled every one. I called my unit's legal assistance office the next morning and started the paperwork to formally revoke Denise and Gary as emergency contacts and beneficiaries. Then I turned my phone off and went back to work, because there were still people counting on me to do my actual job, and my actual job did not include funding somebody else's ribbon-cutting ceremony. The calls started within 48 hours, not questions, accusations. Voicemails demanding to know why the transfer had bounced, why I would do this right when the business needs support, why I was being so selfish after everything they'd done for me. I listened to exactly one voicemail, the one where my mother called me spoiled by the military and said I'd never once been grateful for this family. And then I put the phone in the bottom of my pack and didn't touch it again for 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, my unit was moving a wounded local interpreter and two of our own guys off a ridge under fire, and I did the only thing that has ever made me feel like a real person instead of somebody's convenient bank account. I went out and I got them. All three. It took me and one other medic almost 2 hours, crawling low, packing wounds by feel in the dark, keeping pressure on a leg wound with my bare hands because I'd run out of gauze halfway through. I don't like talking about the details even now, but I'll tell you this: somewhere in that 2 hours, lying flat in the dirt with someone else's blood soaking through my sleeve, I stopped thinking about the missed calls entirely. There is nothing on a hallway floor in Louisiana that compares to the weight of another human being's life in your hands. That night reset something in me. I understood, finally, completely, that my worth was never something my mother got to price. 4 days after that, I was pulled off rotation and flown to Landstuhl for follow-up on a shrapnel wound I hadn't even reported because I didn't think it was serious enough to slow down for. It turned out to be serious enough. While I was recovering, my company commander submitted my file for the Bronze Star with Valor, and it came through faster than anyone expected. I was ordered stateside for a formal ceremony at Fort Polk, live-streamed and open to press, 3 front-row seats reserved for immediate family. I drove to my mother's house the day before the ceremony. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a month. I stood on the porch of the house I grew up outside of, technically, since Gary owned it and I was never quite sure I belonged inside it, and I held out the invitation. Denise opened the door, already annoyed, like I'd interrupted something. She glanced at the gold Army seal on the card, didn't even open it fully, and handed it right back to me. "We can't make it," she said. "Brittany's doing a segment on the morning show about the Academy. It's a huge opportunity, Renee. You understand." I told her it was the Bronze Star with Valor. I told her generals would be there. I told her, quietly, that I'd almost died 4 weeks ago, pulling 3 people off a ridge under fire, and that I really needed her in that seat. Gary appeared behind her in the doorway, arms crossed. "You people get medals for doing your job," he said. "It's not exactly a business launch. We already committed to Brittany." And then my mother said the thing I'll remember for the rest of my life, delivered in the same flat, irritated tone you'd use to turn down a phone call from a telemarketer. "You never once needed us for anything until you wanted attention for it. We have somewhere better to be." She shut the door. I stood on that porch for a long moment, listening to the television turn back on inside, some morning show rerun playing at full volume, and I understood with total clarity that I had just been formally, permanently released from any obligation to those people. There is a specific kind of freedom in finally hearing someone confirm, out loud, exactly what you always suspected. It doesn't hurt the way you think it will. It clears the air. I didn't argue. I didn't cry on that porch. I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove 2 hours to the small brick house in Lafayette where my Aunt Colette had lived for as long as I could remember. Colette was my father's older sister. My father died when I was 6, and after that, my mother made it very clear that his side of the family was a closed chapter, fewer complications that way, she always said. Though I understood now that complications meant people who might notice how I was being treated. Colette never fully accepted that closed door. She wrote me letters every single month I was deployed. Actual handwritten letters, filled with recipes and church gossip and updates about her garden, because she said typing on a screen made her feel too far away from me. She worked 31 years as a school cafeteria manager before retiring on a pension that barely covered her insulin. She never once asked me for a dime. When my transfer to Gary's account bounced, and I needed somewhere to redirect a smaller allotment, just enough for gas and groceries during a rough stretch, Colette was the one who told me to keep my money and mail her pictures instead. I sat in her kitchen that evening and told her everything: the loan, the business, the porch, the door closing. She didn't say a word until I was finished. Then she reached across the table, took my hand in both of hers, the same rough, capable hands that used to pack my school lunches, and said, "Baby, I have been waiting 22 years for somebody in this family to tell the truth out loud. You did that today. That took more courage than any medal." I asked her to come to the ceremony instead. She didn't hesitate for a second. "I'll wear my church dress," she said, like it was the easiest decision she'd ever made in her life, and in a way, I think it was. The next evening, the auditorium at Fort Polk, filled with several hundred people, soldiers in dress uniform, families, local press, a live stream running to thousands more online. I stood backstage in my dress blues, my chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with the uniform fitting wrong, watching the front row fill in. Colette sat exactly where my mother should have been, hands folded in her lap, wearing a pale blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, looking more nervous and more proud than I had ever seen another human being look. Colonel Whitfield read the citation aloud to the entire room, the full account, the ridge, the interpreter, the 2 soldiers, the 2 hours under fire with no working gauze left in my kit. I stood at attention and let the words wash over me instead of flinching from them, because for the first time in my adult life, I let myself believe they were true and that I had earned every syllable. He pinned the medal to my chest. My hands did not shake. I saluted. I held it. Then Colonel Whitfield did something that wasn't on the printed program. He asked me to stay at the podium for one more moment, and he looked directly into the broadcast camera. Every year, he said, this installation partners with the Fort Polk Family Readiness Foundation to recognize what we call our unsung support network, the people who hold a soldier's life together without ever asking for recognition, themselves. This year, on behalf of that foundation and several private community partners, we are honoring one individual with a full scholarship endowment, a paid-off vehicle, and a lifetime membership to Fort Polk's Veterans Medical Outreach Clinic, covering annual checkups and prescriptions at no cost for the rest of her life. He opened a folder. That individual is Colette Marchand. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth. The cameras swung toward her, the room erupted into applause, and up on the massive screen behind the stage, her face appeared, tears already spilling down over 61 years of a life spent giving quietly and asking for nothing. I walked down off that stage, took her hand, and helped her stand, and I felt something settle inside my chest that no amount of money my mother had ever demanded from me could have touched. I knew, standing there under those lights, exactly who was watching the live stream from a hotel conference room 3 states away, where Brittany's morning show segment about her academy had been scheduled to air on a delayed feed at the exact same hour. I knew Denise had a phone in her hand. I knew, somewhere in that hotel room, her jaw had gone slack, watching a school cafeteria worker in a hand-sewn dress receive more real, tangible support in 5 minutes than my mother had offered me in 28 years. It was almost 11 at night when I finally dropped Colette off at her hotel, still clutching the folder with her scholarship and clinic paperwork against her chest, like she was afraid it might disappear if she let go. I climbed into my car, pulled out of the lot, and the second my phone synced to the dashboard, the screen exploded. 31 missed calls. Text after text, scrolling past too fast to read all of them. Call me back right now. You embarrassed this family on national television. How dare you give that woman a car when your own sister needs help with the academy's overhead? Renee, this is not funny. I read every single one at a red light, calm as still water, and then I reached over and turned the phone completely off. I drove the rest of the way home in total silence, and it was the most peaceful silence I had felt in 6 years. They were waiting for me anyway. When I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, my mother's sedan was already parked crooked across 2 spaces, and the 3 of them were standing under the entrance light like they'd been rehearsing. Denise had changed out of whatever she'd worn for the segment into something more presentable for confrontation. Gary stood with his arms crossed, jaw working like he was chewing on his own anger. Brittany was still in her show makeup, mascara starting to streak. You need to call that colonel back tonight, Brittany said before I'd even gotten both feet out of the car. Tell him there was a mix-up. That money is supposed to help the academy. You know Colette doesn't even need a car, she barely leaves the house. I stood there in my dress uniform, medal still pinned to my chest, and looked at the 3 of them under that flickering parking lot light, and I felt nothing rise in me at all. No anger, no old ache. Just a flat, clear certainty. The same certainty I feel checking a wound to see if it needs a tourniquet or just a bandage. This needed a tourniquet. There's no mix-up, I said. The foundation vetted her independently. I didn't nominate her. I didn't even know until they announced it on stage. That's not the point, Gary snapped, stepping forward. You're her blood. You owe this family, not some cafeteria lady who happens to share your last name by accident. I let that sit in the air a moment, because it told me everything about what they'd always believed love was supposed to be a debt owed, collectible on demand. I don't owe anyone anything, I said. Least of all people who couldn't spare 2 hours to watch me nearly die on their behalf and then get honored for surviving it. Denise's face did the thing it always did right before she pivoted tactics, that instant, practiced flicker from fury to wounded innocence. Her eyes filled on command. "I carried you for 9 months," she said, voice cracking exactly on cue. "I raised you alone before Gary came along. You're punishing me for one bad night." I've heard that voice my whole life. I know exactly how many seconds it takes to arrive and exactly how convincing it sounds if you've never watched it happen the same way 100 times before. It didn't move me even slightly. "You didn't miss one night," I said. "You missed 6 years. You missed every deployment. You missed the hospital in Germany. You missed the porch yesterday when I told you I almost died, and you told me you had somewhere better to be. I heard you the first time. I believed you." Brittany tried next, dropping straight into tears, sudden and theatrical, the kind that arrive without a single change in her breathing first. "You're humiliating me in front of my sponsors?" she sobbed. "Do you know what people are saying online right now? You did this on purpose to ruin my launch." I looked at her, 26 years old, mascara running, standing under a parking lot light demanding an apology from a woman who'd spent the last 6 years patching bullet wounds with her bare hands, and something in me that used to bend automatically toward guilt simply did not bend. "I accept the apology neither of you actually gave me," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "Not because I forgive any of this, because I need it to be over, and this is the only way I know how to end it cleanly. Don't call me again asking for money. Don't call me asking me to fix anything with the foundation. That door is closed for good." Denise's face shifted one more time, that flash of victory people get when they think a boundary is just an opening negotiation. "So you'll call the colonel tomorrow then?" she said. "No," I said. "I'm telling you it's over. There's a difference." I got in my car, and I drove away, and none of them followed. I didn't slam a door for effect. I didn't need to. The quiet was louder than anything I could have shouted. 6 months have passed since that night. Brittany's academy folded within 90 days. That turns out a business built on borrowed money, and no actual curriculum doesn't survive first contact with reality. The loan came due, the loan she'd co-signed using paperwork tied to accounts I never approved, and without my allotments propping up the household finances, Gary and Denise couldn't cover it. Their house went up for a short sale 2 months ago. I heard through a cousin, not through them directly, that they're renting a 2-bedroom place across town now. And Brittany moved back in with them because her apartment lease fell through along with everything else. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that. I felt something closer to relief. The particular relief of watching gravity finally do what you'd been holding up with your own bare hands for years. Colette moved into a small ranch house near the lake 2 months ago, nothing extravagant, but hers, paid in full, with a driveway wide enough for the reliable little sedan the foundation gave her. The first brand new car she's ever owned in her life. Every time I have a weekend pass, I drive out there. She always has something in the oven, usually her mother's gumbo recipe, and we sit on her back porch and don't talk about my mother at all unless I bring it up first, which I rarely do anymore. Her medical clinic card sits framed on her refrigerator next to my unit photo, which she says she keeps there so she remembers, every single morning, that some things you give away freely still find their way back to you eventually. I extended my contract last month. I'm training incoming medics now, teaching 18 and 19-year-olds how to keep a person breathing when everything in the world is telling them that person should already be gone. I still think, sometimes, about that porch and the exact tone of my mother's voice telling me she had somewhere better to be. I don't think about it with anger anymore. I think about it the way you think about a wound that's finally, fully closed. You remember it happened, you know exactly where the scar is, but it doesn't ache when the weather changes the way it used to. If anyone watching this has ever handed over pieces of themselves to people who only valued them by the dollar, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not required to keep funding people who cannot be bothered to show up for you. Real family doesn't send you a bill for love. Real family shows up in a church dress, with shaking hands, ready to believe in you before you've even asked them to. If you know exactly what that kind of love costs and exactly what it's worth, drop a comment and let me know I'm not the only one who had to learn it the hard way. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.